it seems like Hamas is negotiating about joining negotiations.
Exactly. And look, let me just start by saying this is extremely complex and also really high stakes as well, as we see these negotiations getting underway today in the Qatari capital. Of course, a lot at stake as Iran continues to threaten Israel with an attack as well. Now, with regards to where we stand, of course, Hamas has already said it will not be attending these talks, but of course, we are expecting to see the mediators on the ground liaising with Hamas officials when these talks conclude. So Hamas is not necessarily inside the room, but of course, still involved in the conversation. Who's going to be taking part in that conversation? Well, NBC News reports that CIA Director Bill Burns and his Israeli counterpart will be taking part. Qatar's Prime Minister and Egypt's Head of Intelligence are also among this group of dealmakers, which is also reported to include other senior figures and stakeholders as well. Of course, the United States has said that a ceasefire agreement is possible, but some really major issues remain. And if you boil them down, it ultimately comes back to this. Number one, the duration of any possible ceasefire. Number two, the number and type of hostages to be released by Hamas. And then number three, this issue of the release of Palestinians detained by Israel, including perhaps the liberation of Palestinian leader Marwan Barghouti, who is currently in an Israeli jail. So there is a lot still left to hammer out here, and a number of key sticking points remain. Of course, from the Hamas perspective, they're saying, look, we already have a framework in place. That is the deal that President Biden put forward back in May, this three-phase proposal that would basically pair the release of hostages from Gaza with a full and complete ceasefire and the release of Palestinian prisoners held in Israel. That first phase would last about 6 weeks. It includes the withdrawal of Israeli forces from all populated areas of Gaza and the release of a number of hostages, including women, the elderly, wounded, in exchange for the release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners as well, and the implementation of this temporary truce. But on the Israeli side, of course, what we see is more pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu from within his own cabinet to essentially seek an assurance from the United States that Israel will be able to continue fighting at the conclusion of this temporary ceasefire. And of course, for Hamas, that's not necessarily a position that they see as viable moving forward. And then also on the other side, Hamas officials also say that Netanyahu is not really interested in reaching an agreement that ends the aggression completely. So there is still some major sticking points here, and where this goes remains to be seen. As I mentioned, really high stakes at this point, and certainly a lot to unpack as we see these talks unfold.
Can I just do a bridge to the market activity we've seen in oil, because it's been an incredibly volatile few weeks. You've gone all the way down the market event, we've gone all the way back up, and then we've come back down again from some of that bounce. What is the market doing in terms of positioning now around the geopolitics?
Look, I mean, the geopolitics are really critical here as well. Obviously moving on the news flow, but at the same time, there's no direct impact on supply. And this is something that analysts have really been hammering home to us over the last couple of weeks. We're seeing oil prices basically trend at where the majority of analysts expect them to end the year. So the geopolitical risk premium appears to be priced into the market at this point. We're seeing WTI sub 80 USD, Brent also just holding at around these levels. So if we did see a ceasefire agreement actually coming through, and of course I have to say the odds of that are still relatively weak at this point. If we did see a deal coming through, then we may see some pullback in the price of oil. And of course, if we do not see a concrete deal, or at least some kind of affirmative word suggesting that a deal is perhaps coming in the next couple of months, then look, maybe we will see oil prices spike here as well. So oil moving on the news flow, moving on the headlines, expect some volatility ahead.